In the previous video, we created a database using the embedded Java DB database. The database we created was the library database, which has two tables. It's a very simple database. It has a table authors and a table books. The authors table is the independent table. In other words, an author can exist without a book. And the books table is a dependent table. In other words, in order for a book to exist, it must have an author. So as such, we created, within the books table, we've created a field author, which is actually a foreign key field, which refers to the ID of authors. Now that we've got our database created, the next step is to create our app. To create our app, we go to the Projects tab, we go to File, create a new project. It'll be of type Java, a Java application. Next, we'll call that we'll call our project School Library and leave everything else as default. Finish. And as you can see, NetBeans has created a full package for us. Now, where a lot of students have a bit of difficulty is how to connect your database to your application. Now, that's very, very simple. In fact, you let NetBeans handle that for you. So what you do is, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create classes for authors and books. These classes will be known as entity classes. Now, an entity is anything that's going to be saved to a database. Now, how do we create an entity class? Very, very simple. We let NetBeans, the NetBeans IDE do this for us. To create an entity class, right-click on the project, which is School Library, move to New, and the second option here, Entity Classes from Database. Click on that. All right, so you got this dialog window. The first option in the dialog window, it says database connection. So we choose the connection that we created earlier on, the library connection. The moment we click that, we see that the two tables that we've created in the library table are now in the available tables box. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select books, and I want you to observe something. When I click on books and click on add, automatically the authors table comes through as well. Now, the reason this is happening is that the NetBeans IDE has already detected that there is a link between books and authors, and that link is that the books table is dependent on the authors table. So books cannot exist without authors, hence it had to bring the authors table as well, and it's going to make a class. Next, all right, we leave everything here as default, except we don't generate JAXB annotations. We don't need JAXB annotations. Yes, generate named query annotations for persistent fields. We will need that, and create the persistence unit. Next, leave everything here as default and finish. Now when we go to our project Explorer, we'll see something really cool. Within the school library application, NetBeans has created a school library package, and within that package we have two classes or three classes. The first one, the school library class, this was the one that was created first. This is your main class. It's where your main method lives. This is the default starting point of your application. And now the two tables entity classes that we've just created from the tables, books and authors. Let's take a look at the authors class. Double click it to open it, and looking at the class, you got the package name, you've got all your imports, and I want you to notice these annotations. Now, what exactly are these annotations? These annotations are indications to the JPA, the Java Persistence API. That is the package that actually handles the transfer of data to and from the database. Now, the JPA package, the JPA functionality within the package recognizes these annotations. And when you look at the first annotation here, it says @entity. This means that this class is an entity class. and it's based on @table name is equal to authors. So it's an entity table that's based on the authors table. Then there are some named queries here. We can use these queries a little later on to extract information from the database. Public class authors implements serializable. This is all automatic. It's beyond the scope of this video to explain why this class authors implements serializable. Right? Let's just say it has to do with how these classes are stored in your database, how the JPA will actually store them into your database. Going forward, look at the next set of variables. Let's look at the variables and then we'll look at the annotations later. First variable, private integer ID. All right, where did this come from? This corresponds, or it maps to the column name is equal to ID. So when we go and we look at our authors table, the ID field in the authors table is mapped to this ID member in this class. Generated value strategy equals generation type identity. What this means is that this is an auto increment field. Optional is equal to false, meaning that this is a field that can never be empty. It has to be filled always. Moving forward, fairly simple. We've got another private string type variable first name, which has been mapped to the first name field in your database table. And we also, in the same way, we have surname and email. Below that, NetBeans has automatically created for us the mutator functions, or the mutator functions. All right, this we got you and your constructors. Here's our two constructors. The getters and setters have already been set. Right, get first name, set first name, etc. And then below that, we see there's a method called getBooksCollection. We'll look at how these are used later on. There's a hash code which is necessary for the JPA, and there's an equals method. This is for comparing different authors. We're going to look at this a little later on. And the toString method. In fact, this method we are going to change. All right, so much for the authors table. Now let's look at the books table. The books table is slightly more complicated. Again, it's an entity type class. All right, it implements serializable. Very good. And just as with the author table, it has all the usual fields. But I want you to take a look at this. Private authors, author. So Java is already, the NetBeans IDE has already detected that the books class will have embedded within it an object of type authors, right? And this it's actually picked up from the database table. So you can see this is really cool that the NetBeans IDE has already picked up the relationship between the books table and the authors table, so we don't have to do anything there. All right, so we got the many-to-one or the one-to-many relationship, and we will use these the authors variable here, the authors member in this class, to store the author of this book. Your usual getter and setter methods and constructors. Get author, it returns the author, and again you can see, just as with the author class, it has your hash code, equals, and your toString method. All right, so we've got our entity classes. The next thing we're going to need is to create some way for these entity classes to talk to the database. And how we do this is by creating a JPA Controller class for our entities. All right, so the JPA Controller class, what it does is that it creates methods that actually allow us to communicate to the database using Java. So we don't have to use SQL queries. We can use SQL queries, but for the most basic operations, we don't really need SQL queries. We use the methods in the JPA Controller class. So again, to create a new class, you double click or right click on the project name, new, and you can see down here is JPA Controller classes from entity classes. So what's going to happen here is when I click on this, NetBeans is going to examine my entity classes. There we have our entity classes, books and authors. So I'm going to use just books, right? So I select books and add it across, and you see that automatically the authors entity class will also come across. Now this is because of the dependency between books and authors. Next, where is this going to live? It's going to live in project school library inside the package school library. That's fine. That's exactly where we want it. And finish. Now we're done. So now if we look at our project explorer, we can see that we have the authors class, authors JPA controller, books and books JPA controller. Let's examine these JPA controller classes now. Double click the class to open it up, and we can see public class JPA controller, authors JPA controller. Now let's look at some of the methods that Java has given us here, that the NetBeans IDE has given us. There are a couple of constructors. The first method below that we can see is create. We can use this method. We pass it an author, and this method actually saves that author that we pass it to the database. Edit. This is to update an existing author in the database table. Again, all we need to do is pass it the information and the author, and this method will actually save that author to the database. Destroy, to delete an author from the database. This returns a type list. Find authors entities. It means bring back all the authors from the database. Alright, this is an overridden method that brings back specific authors. So we're looking at first result and max result, the from and to. And as we can see, as you go down, you'll see there's more convenience methods that enable us to access the database. If we look at the books JPA controller, we will find that it has similar methods, very, very similar methods. So essentially all your CRUD capabilities live within this class. In the next video, we're going to look at creating Java Swing UIs to now interact with these JPA controllers to save information to the database and to retrieve information from the